In an age where words traveled by horse and fate was written by distance, one letter held the power to defy time itself. Welcome to a story set in 1587, where love battles separation, and hope is carried by the faintest ink on fragile parchment. The year was 1587. Europe was a land of towering castles, winding cobblestone streets, and air thick with the whispers of distant battles and unspoken secrets. In the small village of Aldenford, nestled between dense forests and a slow-moving river, life moved at its own unhurried pace. Yet, for young Thomas, each day passed like a slow, agonizing wait. Thomas was no ordinary man. He was the son of a humble farmer, his life grounded in tilling soil, tending livestock, and bearing the weight of tradition. But within his heart, a fire burned brighter than any hearth, a fire of longing, hope, and a love that dared to dream beyond the borders of his small world. Her name was Eliza. Eliza was the daughter of the village blacksmith. Her eyes, deep and mysterious, held the stories of countless whispered evenings and the quiet melancholy of separation. Their love had blossomed slowly, like the delicate flowers of spring, nurtured by stolen glances, soft words shared beneath the ancient oak, and promises spoken in the hush of twilight. But fate, as it often does, dealt its cruel hand. In the early summer of that year, news arrived that Eliza's father had been summoned to serve the crown's distant needs. He was to travel to London, the heart of the realm, leaving the village and Eliza behind. The decision was final, the journey dangerous, and the separation indefinite. On the day of departure, the village square gathered in quiet reverence. Villagers stood by, their faces etched with sorrow and empathy, knowing well the price of serving the crown. Thomas approached Eliza, his heart pounding louder than the distant church bells. "Eliza," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the wind. "I cannot bear this distance, but I will write. I will send you letters every moon if need be until you return." Eliza's eyes glistened, a mixture of pride and sorrow. "And I will await them, Thomas. Every letter, every word. They will be my lifeline." With a heavy heart, Thomas watched Eliza disappear into the folds of the crowd, leaving behind the echo of promises and the scent of old earth. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Thomas, determined to hold on to hope, began to write. His letters, inked with trembling hands, spoke of daily life in Aldenford, of the changing seasons, of the village's slow turn toward winter. He wrote of his yearning, of his dreams, and of the steadfast belief that Eliza would one day return. Each letter was sealed with a pressed flower from the garden, a silent symbol of his unwavering love. But in 1587, sending a letter was no simple task. Thomas traveled miles to the nearest post town, facing treacherous paths and unpredictable weather. He paid handsomely for the service, entrusting his fragile parchment to couriers who promised delivery. Every step he took was a prayer. Every coin he spent, an act of faith. Back in London, Eliza waited in a small chamber above the blacksmith's workshop. Each day she would rise before dawn, her eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of messenger. Days stretched endlessly, and yet her resolve remained unshaken. However, the world around them was not still. The political climate of England in 1587 was turbulent. Queen Elizabeth I ruled with strength and caution, constantly wary of threats from foreign powers and internal conspiracies. The atmosphere of suspicion extended even into the heart of common folk life. where rumors of spies and traitors were whispered in hushed tones. Every letter carried the risk of interception, and every messenger was a potential target. One day, a shadow fell over Eliza's hope. A visiting nobleman, curious about village affairs, had inquired into the correspondence that flowed in and out of the blacksmith's home. His questions were subtle, but his eyes bore the weight of authority. Eliza's father, cautious and protective, ensured that the inquiries were met with polite deflection. Yet the seed of doubt had been planted. As autumn approached, Thomas's letters grew sporadic. The once regular arrivals dwindled, and the space where his last letter had been left remained empty. Each passing day without a message felt like a silent ache, a growing uncertainty that clouded Eliza's heart. "I must hold on," she told herself one evening, staring at the empty hearth. "Thomas will not abandon me. The bond we share is stronger than distance." But fate is often crueler than hope. Unbeknownst to Eliza, the political unrest in London had worsened. Couriers carrying private messages were being intercepted, their content scrutinized for signs of dissent or treachery. A simple love letter could be deemed suspicious. In one such raid, Thomas's latest letter vanished, lost to an unseen hand. Eliza, unaware of the letter's fate, waited. The story of their separation, of silent suffering and undying hope, was just beginning. Eliza sat by the dimly lit window, her eyes fixed on the horizon, where the last light of the sun kissed the distant hills. The room was silent, except for the soft crackle of the fireplace and the occasional creak of wooden beams. Days had turned into weeks since the disappearance of Thomas's last letter. A void of silence now threatened to swallow the fragile hope that once kept her spirit alive. Her father, once a sturdy and protective figure, had grown weary. The nobleman's questions seemed innocent at first, but the unspoken suspicion in his eyes hinted at a darker truth. Whispers among the villagers began to stir. Rumors of forbidden communications with traitors, of unsanctioned alliances that endangered the crown. Each whispered word weighed heavier on Eliza's heart. "I must know," she whispered to herself. "Why has he fallen silent? What became of my Thomas?" Desperate for answers, Eliza decided to take matters into her own hands. She ventured beyond the boundaries of the village for the first time in her life, determined to find the courier service or any trace of her lost letter. Her small feet carried her through muddy paths, over broken fences, and into the nearest town where the messengers operated. The town was a bustling hub, filled with traders, travelers, and clerks. But the atmosphere was tense. Fear hung in the air, thick as the ever-present fog. Eliza approached the postmaster, an old man whose eyes seemed to carry the weight of many untold stories since. "Sir," she began, her voice trembling, "I have sent letters from Aldenford months ago. Have you received any from a man named Thomas, addressed to Eliza?" The old man looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Letters from the villages are rare, miss, especially those from distant farmers. But there was a batch intercepted not long ago, ordered by the Crown's secret police." Eliza's heart sank. "Intercepted?" He nodded solemnly. "Rumors of treason run deep. The authorities have taken extra caution in these troubled times. Some letters were confiscated, examined, and never delivered." A shiver ran down her spine. The possibility that Thomas's words, his voice, his love, had been lost to suspicion and powerlessness was unbearable. Meanwhile, miles away in London, Thomas faced his own agony. He stood in a small chamber, dimly lit by a single candle. The walls seemed to close in around him. Weeks had passed since he last saw Eliza. His last letter, sent with trembling hope, had vanished somewhere between the post town and the capital. He had written of his undying love, of the village's slow march into winter, of his longing to see her again. But instead of finding solace in correspondence, he found only silence. The political unrest in London had worsened, with plots of rebellion and espionage rumored to be swirling through the air. Every message from the countryside was a potential liability. Couriers were now interrogated, their packages searched, and their destinations questioned. One afternoon, as Thomas waited anxiously at the post station, a courier approached him, looking troubled. "My lord," the courier said, bowing slightly, "I regret to inform you, your letter never arrived. It was seized under orders of Her Majesty's Secret Council." Thomas's hands trembled. "Seized? Why? What treachery do they suspect in words written from love?" The courier shook his head. "I do not know, my lord, but such is the fear that rules these times." Back in Oldenford, Eliza refused to surrender to despair. Determined to defy the growing shadows of silence, she began to write. Not letters, but a diary. A record of her days, her hopes, her fears. Every entry a testament to her love and resilience. She hid the diary in the hollow of an ancient oak tree, hoping that one day Thomas would find it. "I will not let the world take him away from me," she whispered. As the first snowflakes of winter began to fall, blanketing the village in white, Eliza stood by the oak tree, pressing the diary against her heart. She made a silent vow. No matter the walls of fear, no matter the chains of suspicion, love will find its way. Little did they know, the forces at play were not so easily defeated. A hidden hand continued to intercept and suppress their voices, a silent force determined to keep them apart. But in a world ruled by ink and parchment, where words could spark revolutions and love letters could threaten empires, the story was far from over. Have you ever heard? Even centuries ago, humanity faced unimaginable tests. And today, we remember them only as stories. If you want to uncover these forgotten truths of the past, subscribe to Midnight History.